Sharon Nelson's hands were still trembling when she pressed the lock on the back door of Harmony Key's music studio. The rain had turned the alley into a river of neon reflections and shadows, and somewhere in that darkness, a man was dying. But it wasn't the storm that made her hands shake. It was the decision she had just made. The decision that would change everything. 2 minutes ago, she had been wiping down the piano keys after her last student left, mentally calculating how many more lessons she needed to book before the eviction notice became final. The building owner wanted her out by the end of the month. 30 days to pack up 8 years of her life. 30 days to watch her dream of running a community music school dissolve into nothing. Then she heard the crash. Metal garbage cans toppling over in the alley behind her studio. The sound of someone running, stumbling, gasping for air. She had rushed to the back window and looked out into the rain-soaked darkness. That's when she saw him, a man in what looked like an expensive gray dress shirt, now torn and soaked through with something darker than water. Blood. So much blood. He had collapsed against the brick wall of her building, one hand pressed against his side where crimson seeped between his fingers. His other hand braced against the wall like he was trying to hold himself upright through sheer force of will. His black hair was slicked back but coming loose, rain and sweat making it fall across his forehead. Even injured, even bleeding out in an alley, there was something about the way he held himself that screamed danger and power. Then she heard the sirens. Blue and red lights strobed through the rain, getting closer. Voices shouted orders, harsh and aggressive. Split up! He couldn't have gone far. Shoot on sight! Shoot on sight. Not apprehend. Not bring him in. Shoot on sight. That's when Sharon made her choice. Maybe it was because she had grown up watching her brother get harassed by cops who saw black men as targets first and citizens second. Maybe it was because something in her gut told her that men who shouted "shoot on sight" weren't interested in justice. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe she just couldn't watch another human being die in an alley while she did nothing. She had thrown open the back door and grabbed him by the arm. Inside. Now. He had looked at her with eyes so dark they seemed black in the dim light, and for one terrifying second, she thought he might refuse. But then he moved, letting her pull him through the doorway and into the shadowed interior of her studio. She locked the door behind them just as the first officer rounded the corner into the alley. Now Sharon stood in the darkness of her studio, her cream-colored knit sweater soaked with rain and someone else's blood, listening to boots stomp past her door. The man she had saved leaned against the wall near her upright piano, one hand still pressed to his wound, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Everything about this was wrong. The studio felt smaller with him in it, like his presence filled up all the air and space. Her worn jeans and gold hoop earrings suddenly felt inadequate, like she was a child playing dress-up in a world she didn't understand. The eviction notices stacked on her desk in the corner seemed to glow in the darkness, advertising her failure to anyone who looked. But it was him that made her most nervous. Up close, she could see details she had missed in the alley. The luxury watch on his wrist that caught what little light filtered through the windows, the kind of watch that cost more than her entire year's rent. The perfectly tailored cut of his shirt beneath the blood and rain. The way his face, sharp and angular with features that suggested East Asian heritage, showed no panic despite the wound in his side. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't panicking. He was watching her with the same calculated calm of a predator assessing its surroundings, deciding whether she was a threat or a tool or something else entirely. "They're not real police, are they?" Sharon whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain hammering against the windows. His eyes narrowed slightly. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice low and controlled with an accent she couldn't quite place, he answered, "No, they're not." Something about the way he said it, with no fear, no gratitude, just cold acknowledgement, made Sharon's stomach drop. She had not saved some innocent person being framed. She had pulled something dangerous into her world, something that looked at her like she was a fascinating problem he hadn't expected to encounter. Outside, the voices grew more distant. The boots stomped further down the alley. The sirens began to fade, but Sharon couldn't move. She stood frozen in her own studio, staring at the stranger whose blood was now on her hands, literally and figuratively. "You should not have helped me," he said finally, his dark eyes never leaving hers. Sharon's heart hammered against her ribs. "Probably not. You have no idea who I am." "No," she admitted. "I don't." He tilted his head slightly, studying her the way someone might study a painting they couldn't quite figure out. "And yet, you risked everything to hide me." Sharon wanted to say something brave, something that would make her sound like she knew what she was doing, but the truth was simpler and more terrifying. "I couldn't just let you die out there." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to read. Then it was gone, replaced by that same calm, calculated mask. He straightened up from the wall, and Sharon saw him wince, just slightly, before he controlled the reaction. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sharon. Sharon Nelson." She hated how small her voice sounded. "This is my studio. I teach piano here. Or I did. I'm being evicted next month. So I guess." She stopped herself, realizing she was rambling, giving too much information to a stranger who probably didn't care about her failing business or her mountain of debt. But he was looking at her differently now, his gaze moving from her face to the studio around them, taking in the beat-up upright piano, the mismatched chairs, the stack of beginner music books on the shelf, the eviction notices on her desk that she couldn't hide fast enough. "Sharon Nelson," he repeated, like he was committing it to memory. "I owe you a debt." The way he said it made it sound less like gratitude and more like a contract she had unknowingly signed. Before Sharon could respond, before she could ask him who he was or what he had done to have fake police hunting him through the rain, he moved toward the back door. He moved like someone who had never been afraid of anything in his life, smooth and controlled despite the wound in his side. "Wait," Sharon started, but he was already unlocking the door, checking the alley with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her one last time. The red and blue lights had faded completely now, leaving only the rain and the darkness. "Forget this happened," he said. "Forget you saw me. It will be safer for you that way." Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain like a ghost, like he had never been there at all. Sharon stood alone in her studio, her hands still shaking, blood on her sweater that would never completely wash out. She walked to the piano and sat down heavily on the bench, her mind racing. Through the windows, she could see the alley where she had found him, empty now except for the toppled garbage cans and the rain. She had no idea who he was. She had no idea what she had just become involved in. But she knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones like ice, that this was not over. The man with the expensive watch and the dangerous eyes had looked at her like she was worth remembering. And something told Sharon that being remembered by a man like that was either the best thing that could happen to her, or the worst. She had come to work tonight worried about eviction notices and overdue bills. She was leaving with blood on her hands and the feeling that her entire life had just shifted in a direction she couldn't control. The rules had always kept her safe. But tonight, she had broken every single one. And the man who saw her do it knew exactly where to find her. Before we continue with this story, I need you to do something for me. Go ahead and like this video, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It truly means a lot to me seeing this community grow across the world. Every like and comment helps us reach more people who love dark romance thrillers. Together. Sharon was wrapping her metronome in newspaper when she heard the first crash. She paused, one hand still holding the device that had kept time for hundreds of her students over the years, the other clutching the wrinkled sports section she'd been using as packing material. The sound came from the alley behind the studio, metal scraping against concrete, followed by what might have been a groan or just the wind. She set the metronome down carefully in the box marked "Fragile, Teaching Supplies," and checked her phone. 11:47 p.m. She should have left hours ago, but packing always took longer than she expected. Every item she wrapped was a memory. Every box she sealed felt like giving up another piece of the dream she'd built here. The eviction notice sat on top of the stack on her desk, its red stamp visible even in the dim light. Final notice of eviction. Vacate premises by March 31st. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to pack up 8 years of her life. 8 years of teaching neighborhood kids how to read music, how to find themselves in the space between the notes. Another crash. Louder this time. Then the unmistakable sound of someone falling. Sharon moved to the back window and peered out through the rain-streaked glass. The alley was a mess of shadows and yellow light from the single street lamp that actually worked. At first, she saw nothing but overturned garbage cans and the shimmer of rain on wet pavement. Then movement caught her eye, a figure stumbling against the brick wall of her building, sliding down slowly like they couldn't hold themselves up anymore. Her breath fogged the glass as she leaned closer. The figure was a man. She could see that much. He wore what looked like an expensive gray dress shirt, but it was hard to tell because it was soaked through with rain and something darker. His hand pressed against his side, and even from here, Sharon could see the dark stains spreading between his fingers. He was bleeding. Badly. Sharon's first instinct was to call 911, her hand already reaching for her phone. Then she heard the sirens, getting closer fast. Too fast, like they'd been right behind him. Blue and red lights strobed through the rain, painting the alley in alternating colors. The man in the alley heard them too. His head jerked up, and even from this distance, Sharon could see the way his whole body tensed. Not the relief of someone being rescued. The trapped alertness of prey that's just been cornered. Sharon watched 3 figures round the corner into the alley, all wearing what looked like tactical police gear. But something was wrong. The way they moved wasn't right. Too aggressive, too coordinated. They weren't calling out to identify themselves or offering help. "There!" one of them shouted. End of the alley. The injured man tried to stand, to run, but his legs gave out. He fell to one knee, and that's when Sharon saw one of the officers raise his weapon. "Shoot him!" Another voice barked. "Don't let him get away." Not, "Hands up." Not, "You're under arrest." Just, "Shoot." Sharon didn't think. She was already moving, yanking open the back door and running out into the rain. The cold hit her like a slap, soaking through her cream-colored sweater in seconds. She reached the man in 3 strides, grabbed his arm, and hauled with strength she didn't know she had. "Inside," she hissed. "Now." He looked up at her, and Sharon felt her heart stop. His eyes were so dark they looked black, and they held no fear, no panic. Just a cold, calculating assessment that seemed to take her apart and put her back together in the space of a heartbeat. Then he moved, letting her pull him to his feet, half carrying him through the door. Sharon slammed it behind them and threw the deadbolt just as boots pounded into the alley. She pressed her finger to her lips, and the man nodded once, sharp and controlled. She could hear his breathing, steady despite the wound in his side, and realized with a spike of fear that this was not someone who panicked easily. "Check the dumpster!" a voice shouted outside. "What about that building?" "It's just some music studio. Been empty all night." Sharon held her breath, her back pressed against the door. The man had moved silently to the side, out of view from the window, and she noticed he'd positioned himself with clear sightlines to both the back door and the front entrance, like he was already calculating escape routes and defensive positions. "Spread out," the voice commanded. "He's bleeding. He can't have gone far. The boots moved away, but Sharon could still hear them, splitting up to search the surrounding streets. She waited, counting her heartbeats, until the sounds faded to nothing but rain. Only then did she turn to look at the stranger she'd just saved. He was leaning against the wall near her upright piano, one hand still pressed to his wound, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. Up close, she could see the details that the rain and darkness had hidden, the sharp, angular features that suggested East Asian heritage. The black hair slicked back with precision, now falling loose across his forehead. The expensive watch on his wrist that caught the faint light from the street lamp outside. Everything about him, from his posture to his clothes to the way he held himself perfectly still, radiated money and power. But it was the blood that kept drawing her attention. So much blood, seeping through his fingers, dripping onto her hardwood floor. "You're hurt," Sharon said, her voice sounding too loud in the quiet studio. "Yes." His voice was low, controlled, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Korean, maybe? Not a question, just acknowledgement. Those weren't real police, were they? Something flickered across his face. No, they weren't. Sharon wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how soaked her sweater was, how the blood on her hands was still warm. "Who are you?" "Someone you should not have helped." He straightened slightly, wincing in a way that told Sharon the wound was worse than he was letting on. "But I am grateful nonetheless. You need a hospital." "No hospitals." The way he said it left no room for argument. "They will be watching. You're going to bleed to death." "Perhaps." He tilted his head, studying her in that same unnerving way. "But if you have basic supplies, I can prevent that." Sharon looked at him. Really looked at him. The expensive clothes ruined by blood and rain. The watch that probably cost more than her car. The complete lack of fear in his eyes despite the fact that he was injured and hunted and trapped in a stranger's music studio. Nothing about this made sense, but she'd already made her choice when she pulled him out of that alley. "I have a sewing kit," she said finally, "for fixing torn sheet music and stuff. And I think there's a first aid kit in the supply closet from when I used to have younger kids running around. That will work." Sharon moved to the supply closet, her hands shaking as she searched through boxes of old music books and broken metronomes. She found the first aid kit buried under a stack of outdated theory workbooks. The white plastic case yellowed with age. The sewing kit was in her desk drawer, the little tin container her grandmother had given her years ago. When she turned back, he'd moved to the piano bench and was carefully pulling off his shirt. Sharon's breath caught. The wound was a gash across his ribs, deep and angry, still bleeding steadily. But it was the rest of him that made her stop. His torso was marked with scars, old ones that had healed into silver lines across his skin. These weren't accidents. These were the kind of scars you got from violence, the kind that told stories Sharon wasn't sure she wanted to know. "You've done this before," she said quietly. "Yes." He took the first aid kit from her hands and opened it with practiced efficiency, sorting through the contents with quick, assessing movements. "The needle and thread, please." Sharon handed him the sewing kit, watching as he threaded the needle with steady hands. "I can do it," she offered. "I'm pretty good with my hands, piano teacher." He looked at her for a long moment, then handed her the needle. "Steady hands are important." "Yes." Sharon pulled over her desk chair and sat down in front of him, forcing herself to look at the wound and not think about what she was about to do. She'd sewn up torn fabric 1,000 times. This was just fabric. Ignore the fact that it was skin. Ignore the fact that he was watching her with those dark, calculating eyes. She cleaned the wound first with the antiseptic wipes from the first aid kit, trying not to flinch at the way he didn't even react to what must have been excruciating pain. Then she threaded the needle through his skin, her hands steadier than she expected, pulling the edges of the wound together one careful stitch at a time. "You didn't call the police," he said after a long silence. "Why?" Sharon focused on the next stitch, on the precise movement of her hands. "Because those men outside weren't acting like police, and because I've seen what happens when cops decide someone's guilty before they even ask questions. Personal experience." "My brother." The words came out harder than she intended. "Got stopped for matching a description when he was 16. They put him on the ground with their knees on his back while my mother screamed at them that he was just walking home from basketball practice. He was wearing his school jersey, had his gym bag with his name on it. Didn't matter. They saw a black kid in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time." She finished another stitch, her jaw tight. "So no, I don't automatically trust men with badges and guns who are yelling 'shoot to kill' in dark alleys." "Smart," he said quietly. "The men outside were not police. They were assassins wearing stolen uniforms." Sharon's hands didn't shake, but it was close. Assassins. As in people who murder for money. "Yes." "And they were trying to kill you." "Yes." She tied off the final stitch and sat back, looking at her work. The stitching wasn't perfect, not like a real doctor would do, but it was clean and tight, and the bleeding had stopped. She covered it with gauze pads and tape from the first aid kit, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind tried to process what he'd just told her. "Who are you?" she asked again, this time not sure she wanted the answer. He looked at her for a long moment, and Sharon had the distinct impression he was deciding how much truth to give her. "My name is Han Hyun, and I am someone you should forget you ever met." Kind of hard to forget someone you just stitched up in your music studio at midnight. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Nevertheless, for your safety, forgetting would be wise." He stood, moving with surprising ease considering he'd just been sewn back together with a sewing kit. Sharon stood too, suddenly aware of how small her studio felt with him in it, how much space he seemed to take up just by existing. Han Hyun picked up his ruined shirt and pulled it back on, buttoning it carefully over the bandage. The blood was less noticeable on the dark fabric, but Sharon knew it was there. She'd seen how much there was. "You live here?" he asked, his eyes moving around the studio with the same assessing gaze he'd used on her, taking in the worn furniture, the outdated equipment, the stack of eviction notices she'd been too tired to hide. "No. I have an apartment a few blocks away. This is just my studio. Or it was. I'm being evicted at the end of the month." His gaze sharpened on the notices. "Why?" Sharon laughed, the sound bitter even to her own ears. "Because teaching piano to kids whose parents can barely afford the lessons doesn't generate enough income to satisfy corporate landlords. The building got bought out 6 months ago by some investment company. They want to turn this into luxury condos or organic juice bars or whatever else makes rich people feel good about gentrifying neighborhoods." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly exhausted. "I've been here 8 years, taught over 200 kids. Some of them are in college now on music scholarships. Some of them just needed a place to go after school where someone cared if they showed up. Doesn't matter. Numbers don't work, so I'm out." Han Hyun said nothing, but Sharon saw his eyes linger on the final notice stamp, on her worn jeans and the cheap sneakers she wore because her good shoes had fallen apart months ago. She saw him take in every detail of her struggle like he was cataloging it for some purpose she couldn't begin to guess. "You should rest," Sharon said, breaking the silence. "At least until you're sure those men are gone. You can stay in the supply closet if you want. It's not comfortable, but it's out of sight. I will not stay long." He moved toward the back door, checking the alley through the window with the practiced caution of someone who'd done this many times before. "But I will wait until the search moves on." Sharon nodded, not sure what else to say. She went back to her packing, though her hands kept shaking too much to wrap anything properly. She was aware of him watching her, those dark eyes tracking her movements as she fumbled with newspaper and tape. "Why did you help me?" he asked suddenly. "You did not know who I was. You did not know if I deserved to be caught." Sharon set down the metronome she'd been trying to rap for the third time and looked at him. "Because nobody deserves to be shot in an alley without even a chance to explain themselves. And because something in my gut told me those men weren't interested in justice. Your instinct was correct." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I owe you a debt, Sharon Nelson. That is not something I say lightly." The way he said it made Sharon's skin prickle. Not gratitude, something heavier than that. More binding, like she'd just entered into a contract she didn't understand. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "Just stay alive. That's payment enough." But Han Hyun was already shaking his head. "You do not understand. Where I come from, debts are sacred. You saved my life when you had no reason to trust me, no reason to risk yourself. That is not a debt that can be ignored." Before Sharon could respond, before she could tell him that she didn't want anything from him except for him to disappear and take all this danger with him, he moved to her desk. He pulled out her chair and sat down, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his stitches. Then he opened her laptop. "What are you doing?" "Memorizing." His fingers moved across the keyboard, opening her browser history, her email, her banking app that she'd left logged in because she could never remember the password. "Your name, your address, your debts, your eviction date, the people who matter to you." Sharon lunged forward, trying to close the laptop, but he caught her wrist with surprising gentleness. His grip was firm but not painful, and when she looked at his face, she saw something that might have been apology. "I need to know how to find you," he said, "to repay the debt, and to ensure that what happened tonight does not follow you home." "I don't want your help," Sharon said. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She was drowning in debt and eviction notices and the slow death of everything she'd worked for. Of course she wanted help. She just didn't want it from someone who talked about assassins like they were a normal Tuesday occurrence. Han Hyun released her wrist and stood, closing the laptop with a soft click. "Want and need are different things. I will remember you, Sharon Nelson, and when the time comes, I will repay what I owe." He checked the window again, then moved to the back door. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, and the sirens had faded completely. He unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a crack, scanning the alley with the methodical precision of a soldier. "Wait," Sharon said. "At least let me call you a car or something. You're still hurt. I have people I can call." He paused at the threshold, looking back at her one last time. In the dim light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, beautiful in a dangerous, untouchable way. "Forget this happened. Forget you saw me. It will be safer for you. How am I supposed to forget something like this? Try." Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain and darkness like he'd never been there at all. Sharon stood alone in her studio, listening to the rain and her own racing heartbeat. The first aid kit lay open on her desk, bloody gauze wadded up next to her sewing kit. The hardwood floor where he'd stood had dark spots that she knew were blood. This had happened. This was real. She cleaned up the blood as best she could, threw away the gauze and antiseptic wipes, and washed her hands 3 times until the water ran clear. Then she went back to packing, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept replaying the moment she'd seen him in the alley, the decision that had seemed so clear in that instant. Had she done the right thing? Had she just saved someone who deserved to be caught? But she remembered the way those men had moved, the casual cruelty in their voices when they said, "Shoot to kill." Whatever Han Hyun was, whatever he'd done, those men hadn't been interested in arrest or justice. They'd been interested in execution. Sharon packed until 2 a.m., then gave up and went home. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, those dark, calculating eyes that had seemed to see right through her. She saw the scars on his torso, the practiced ease with which he'd assessed his own wound. This was a man who lived in violence, who knew its rhythms and its costs, and she'd saved his life. When Sharon finally dragged herself out of bed the next morning, her whole body ached like she'd run a marathon. She made coffee and turned on the news while she tried to convince herself to eat breakfast. The anchor's voice droned on about traffic and weather until Sharon was reaching for the remote to turn it off. Then she heard. Violent confrontation between rival gangs left 3 dead in the downtown warehouse district last night. Police are calling it an escalation of an ongoing territory dispute between organized crime factions. No arrests have been made, and police are asking anyone with information to... Sharon's hand froze on the remote. Downtown warehouse district. Last night, 3 dead, but there was no mention of a police chase. No mention of an injured man fleeing through alleys. No mention of assassins in stolen SWAT uniforms. She watched the rest of the news, but the story never came up again. Just gang violence and ongoing investigation and stern-faced police captains promising to crack down on organized crime. The coffee turned bitter in her mouth. What had she stepped into? Sharon got to the studio the next day, her mind still churning through everything that had happened. She was so preoccupied that she almost missed it at first. The stack of bills on her desk, crisp and new, bound with a paper band. She picked them up slowly, counted them twice because she couldn't believe it the first time. $10,000. In cash. There was a note underneath, written in precise, elegant handwriting on expensive cardstock, for the stitches. And the discretion. H. Sharon's hands shook as she set the money down. $10,000. That was 3 months of rent on her apartment. That was enough to pay off the smallest of her debts, to buy herself some breathing room, to maybe, possibly, keep fighting to save her studio. But it was also blood money. Money from a man who admitted to being hunted by assassins. Money that came with the weight of that debt he'd talked about, that sacred obligation she didn't understand. She should give it back. She should call the police, the real police, and tell them what happened. She should do the right thing. Sharon looked around her studio. At the piano she'd bought used when she first opened, the keys worn smooth by thousands of student hands. At the music stand her mother had given her, the one with her grandmother's initials carved into the bass. At the photos on the wall of her students at recitals, their faces proud and scared and excited all at once. She picked up the money and hid it in the lockbox where she kept her emergency cash, buried under old receipts and forgotten business cards. She didn't use it, but she didn't throw it away either. 3 days passed. Sharon taught her lessons, packed more boxes, and tried not to think about the man with the dark eyes who'd bled in her studio. She almost convinced herself it had been some kind of stress-induced fever dream, that the money wasn't real, that none of it had happened. Then she went to the bank. Sharon had been dreading this conversation for weeks. The loan officer, a middle-aged white woman named Patricia who always looked at Sharon like she was trying to decide if she was a credit risk, had agreed to meet with her to discuss options for her mounting debt. Sharon knew what that meant. It meant, we're going to tell you all the ways you've failed and then turn you down anyway. But she had to try. She sat in Patricia's office, her worn jeans and cream sweater feeling even more inadequate in the sleek corporate environment, and prepared to beg. "Miss Nelson," Patricia said, her voice the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "I've reviewed your account, and I'm afraid, I know I'm behind," Sharon interrupted. "But I have a plan. I've been booking more students, and I have some money saved up now, and if you could just extend the loan for another 6 months, I can get caught up. I promise." Patricia blinked at her. "Miss Nelson, I'm trying to tell you that your mortgage has been paid." Sharon's brain stuttered to a halt. "What? Your mortgage on the studio building. It's been paid in full for the year. Patricia turned her computer screen so Sharon could see it. The payment came through 3 days ago. Some kind of anonymous benefactor, it looks like. The money came from an overseas account, fully verified, completely legal. Sharon stared at the screen, at the number that represented a year of her mortgage payments. Paid in full. Anonymous. That's not possible. It's unusual, certainly, but it's all documented. Someone has taken care of your debt, Miss Nelson. You're current on all your accounts. Sharon drove back to the studio in a daze. She was still trying to process what had happened when she pulled into the alley behind the building and saw the truck. A moving truck, parked right in front of her back door. 2 men were unloading boxes, carrying them inside her studio like they owned the place. Hey! Sharon jumped out of her car and ran toward them. What are you doing? This is private property. One of the men, a big guy with a clipboard, looked up. Delivery for Harmony Key's music studio. We're supposed to set everything up inside. Delivery of what? I didn't order anything. He checked his clipboard. Says here. 1 electronic keyboard, professional grade. 2 acoustic guitars. 1 violin. 1 cello. And... He squinted at the paper. A bunch of music books and stands and stuff. All prepaid, ma'am. We're just supposed to deliver and install. Sharon walked past him into her studio and stopped dead. The instruments were already inside, still in their boxes but clearly expensive. Professional grade. The kind of equipment she'd been dreaming about for years but could never afford. There was even a new desk, sleek and modern, to replace her beat-up old one. Who ordered this? She demanded. Don't know, ma'am. Order came through a company account. All anonymous. He pulled out a paper and handed it to her. Just need you to sign that you received everything. Sharon signed in a daze, barely seeing what she was writing. The men finished unloading and left. And she was alone with thousands of dollars of equipment she hadn't asked for. She knew who'd sent it. Of course she knew. I owe you a debt. Sharon sat down at her new desk and put her head in her hands. This was wrong. This was too much. She'd stitched up a wound and hidden a stranger for an hour. That didn't earn her a year of mortgage payments and a studio full of new equipment. But part of her, the part that had been drowning in debt and eviction notices for months, wanted to just accept it. Wanted to say thank you and move on and let someone else carry the weight for once. She was still sitting there, staring at the new instruments, when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Miss Nelson? The voice was young, male, with a Korean accent. My name is Ji-hoon Park. I'm new to the area, and I was wondering if you were taking new students? Sharon's brain struggled to shift gears. Oh, yes. I'm taking new students. What's your skill level? Intermediate, I think. I've been playing for a few years. Okay, great. When would you like to come in for an assessment? Would today work? I know it's short notice, but I'm eager to find a teacher. Sharon looked around her studio, at the chaos of new equipment and half-packed boxes. Sure. Can you come at 4? Perfect. Thank you, Miss Nelson. Ji-hoon Park showed up at exactly 4 p.m., and Sharon understood immediately why the name had sounded Korean. He was a teenager, maybe 16 or 17, with the same East Asian features and precise controlled movements she'd seen on Han Hyun. He wore designer jeans and a plain black t-shirt, expensive sneakers that probably cost more than Sharon's monthly grocery budget. But it was his eyes that made her pause. The same dark, observant eyes that seemed to catalog everything, that watched her with an intensity that felt calculated rather than curious. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Ji-hoon said, his English perfect but accented. I'm living with my uncle now, and he thought it would be good for me to continue my piano studies. Your uncle, Sharon repeated, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. Yes. He's very insistent that I maintain my education. Ji-hoon smiled, and it was polite and warm and didn't reach his eyes at all. He says music is important for discipline. Sharon showed him to the piano and had him play something for assessment. The moment his fingers touched the keys, she knew this was no intermediate student. Ji-hoon played with the technical precision of someone who'd had expensive, intensive training. He played a Chopin etude that Sharon usually saved for her advanced students, and he played it flawlessly. That was beautiful, Sharon said when he finished. But I think you're well past intermediate level. My uncle suggested I might say that. Ji-hoon's smile was apologetic. He thought it would be better to understate my abilities at first. And why would he think that? Because he wanted to make sure you were the right teacher for me. He said you'd understand that sometimes the most important lessons aren't about technique. Sharon felt like she was having two conversations at once, one on the surface about piano lessons, and one underneath about something she couldn't quite grasp. Your uncle sounds very involved in your education. He is. Ji-hoon stood from the piano and looked around the studio with the same assessing gaze she'd seen before. He's very protective. He believes in taking care of the people who matter. The cold feeling in Sharon's stomach spread. Ji-hoon, does your uncle's name happen to be Han Hyun? The boy's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. You've heard of him then? We've met. Sharon crossed her arms, suddenly very aware of how empty her studio was, how late it was getting, how this polite teenager might be more dangerous than he looked. He didn't mention he had a nephew. He doesn't mention a lot of things. Ji-hoon pulled out his phone and showed her a calendar. I'd like to book lessons twice a week if possible. My uncle is paying, of course. He's very generous with people he values. Sharon stared at the phone. At the calendar that was being offered like this was a normal transaction. This is about the debt, isn't it? The mortgage, the instruments, and now you. He's watching me. My uncle believes in being thorough. Ji-hoon pocketed his phone, and he keeps his promises. He said he owed you a debt. This is how he pays it. By sending his nephew to spy on me. By ensuring you're safe. For the first time, Ji-hoon's pleasant mask slipped, and Sharon saw something harder underneath. You helped him when he was vulnerable. That makes you valuable. And valuable things need to be protected. Sharon wanted to argue, to tell this kid and his dangerous uncle that she didn't need protection or surveillance or any of this. But the words stuck in her throat because part of her, the part that had been struggling alone for so long, was relieved. Relieved that someone was watching. Relieved that someone cared if she was safe. And that relief terrified her more than anything else. Twice a week, she said finally. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4. Ji-hoon's smile returned, warm and professional. Perfect. I'll see you next Tuesday, Miss Nelson. After he left, Sharon sat at her new desk and tried to process everything. The mortgage paid off, the new instruments, a nephew who played piano like a professional and watched her like a bodyguard. Han Hyun was keeping his promise. He was repaying his debt. But the cost of that repayment was her privacy, her independence, her ability to pretend that night in the alley hadn't changed everything. She was packing up for the night when she noticed it. The black sedan parked across the street, windows tinted, engine running. She'd seen it yesterday too, though she hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now she couldn't stop staring at it. Sharon grabbed her keys and her jacket and walked straight toward the car. If Han Hyun was going to have her watched, the least he could do was be honest about it. But as soon as she stepped off the curb, the sedan's engine revved. By the time she reached the street, it was already pulling away, leaving her standing alone in the gathering darkness. Sharon watched the taillights disappear around the corner and felt something shift inside her. This wasn't over. Whatever she'd started that night in the rain, whatever debt Han Hyun thought he owed her, it was just beginning. She'd saved a stranger's life and thought that would be the end of it. But she was starting to realize that with men like Han Hyun, there were no clean endings. Only debts and obligations and invisible threads that bound people together in ways they couldn't escape. Sharon went back inside, locked the door, and stood in her studio full of expensive equipment she hadn't asked for, feeling watched by eyes she couldn't see. She'd thought she was saving someone that night. Now she wondered if she'd done the exact opposite, if she'd trapped herself in something she didn't understand and couldn't control. The rain started again, pattering against the windows like a reminder, like the sound of blood dripping on hardwood floors, like the first few notes of a song she didn't know yet but would have to learn to play. The invitation came 2 weeks later, delivered to her studio in a cream-colored envelope with embossed lettering. Sharon almost threw it away, assuming it was junk mail, until she saw the name, the Lotus Foundation Arts and Education Gala. She'd heard of the Lotus Foundation. Everyone in arts education had. They gave massive grants to community programs, funded after-school initiatives, kept struggling schools afloat. Sharon had applied for their grants 3 times over the years and been rejected every time. She wasn't connected enough, didn't have the right networks, couldn't compete with programs that had professional grant writers and political backing. But here was an invitation to their annual gala, personally addressed to her, Miss Sharon Nelson and guest. There was a note attached in handwriting she didn't recognize. Your work with community music education has not gone unnoticed. We would be honored to have you attend. Sharon turned the invitation over in her hands, studying it like it might be a trap. Maybe it was. Maybe this was another part of Han Hyun's invisible manipulation, another way he was managing her life without asking. But the foundation was legitimate. This could be real networking, real opportunities. If she wanted to save her studio long-term, she needed connections like this. She bought a dress from a consignment shop, simple cream-colored with a modest neckline, and borrowed heels from her roommate. She felt like an imposter getting ready, twisting her voluminous curls into an updo that kept threatening to fall apart, putting on makeup she rarely wore because it felt like armor she might need. The gala was at the Grand Hall downtown, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers and the kind of quiet wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Sharon walked in, feeling every eye on her cream-colored consignment dress and borrowed shoes, but she held her head high. She belonged here. Her work mattered as much as anyone else's in this room, even if her budget was a fraction of theirs. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and tried to look comfortable mingling at the edges of conversations. Someone mentioned a charter school expansion. Someone else discussed a corporate sponsorship deal. Sharon smiled and nodded and tried to figure out how to insert herself into these worlds where everyone already seemed to know everyone else. Then she saw him. Han Hyun stood near the far side of the ballroom, surrounded by a cluster of men in expensive suits. But it wasn't the suits that made Sharon's breath catch. It was him. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him like it had been made specifically for his body, his black hair slicked back with that same precision she remembered. But this time there was no blood, no rain, no vulnerability. He looked like power personified, untouchable and dangerous and completely in control. 3 men stood close to him, not quite bodyguards, but not quite colleagues either. They had the same watchful stillness she'd seen in Han that night, the same predator calm. And everyone in the vicinity seemed to unconsciously give him space, like they could sense the danger even if they couldn't name it. Someone called his name, CEO Han, and Sharon watched as people gravitated toward him like he was the sun and they were planets desperate for his warmth. CEO. Han Hyun was a CEO. Sharon's champagne glass trembled in her hand. The fugitive she'd stitched up in her studio, the man who'd bled on her floor, was one of the city's most powerful businessmen, and he'd never told her. As if sensing her stare, Han's eyes found hers across the crowded ballroom. The world seemed to narrow to just that look. His dark eyes locked onto hers with the same intensity she remembered. But now there was recognition, acknowledgement, and something else she couldn't name. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just held her gaze like he was making sure she understood exactly who he was now. Then someone stepped between them, breaking the line of sight, and Sharon could breathe again. She should leave. She should walk out right now and pretend she'd never seen him. But her feet carried her along the perimeter of the room, keeping him in her peripheral vision, watching as he moved through conversations with practiced ease. He knew everyone. Everyone knew him. And not one of these people looked at him and saw the man who'd bled in an alley while assassins hunted him. Impressive, isn't he? A voice said beside her. Sharon turned to find an older woman, elegant in navy silk, studying her with sharp eyes. I'm sorry? Han Hyun. You've been watching him for the past 10 minutes. The woman's smile was knowing. Don't worry. You're not the only one. He has that effect on people. I was just... Who is he exactly? You don't know? The woman looked genuinely surprised. Han Hyun, CEO of Han Seoul International, one of the largest import-export conglomerates in the country. Real estate, shipping, technology, his fingers are in everything. He's also one of our foundation's most generous donors. She leaned in conspiratorially. Though between you and me, I've heard rumors about where his family's money really comes from. Nothing proven, of course. But you don't build that kind of empire without getting your hands dirty. Sharon's stomach turned cold. What kind of rumors? The woman shrugged. Organized crime. Yakuza connections, maybe, or Korean gangs. But that's just gossip. All I know for certain is that he writes very large checks and asks very few questions about where the money goes. The kind of donor every nonprofit dreams of. Sharon excused herself and found a bathroom, locking herself in a stall while her hands shook. Han Seoul International. She pulled out her phone and searched the name. Pages and pages of results, business profiles, Forbes articles, photos of Han Hyun at charity events, ribbon cuttings, political fundraisers. Always surrounded by that same controlled power. Always with those watchful men nearby. She found an article from 3 years ago. Han Seoul International expands into North American markets. The photo showed Han Hyun shaking hands with a governor, both men smiling for the cameras. The caption mentioned his controversial rise and family business connections, but never quite said what those connections were. Sharon searched Han Hyun gang connections and found forum posts, conspiracy theories. Nothing concrete, just whispers and speculation. One post mentioned the Gumnoon Syndicate, called it one of the most powerful Korean organized crime families on the West Coast. Another post claimed Han Hyun had taken over from his father 5 years ago and had been cleaning up the family business ever since. She closed her phone, her heart racing. The man she'd saved wasn't just dangerous, he was powerful, and he'd bought her mortgage, sent his nephew to watch her, infiltrated her life without her permission or understanding. Sharon walked back out to the gala on shaking legs. Han was still surrounded by admirers, but as she emerged from the hallway, his eyes found hers again. This time he excused himself from his conversation and moved toward her with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Sharon didn't run. She stood her ground as he crossed the ballroom, as people parted unconsciously to let him through, as he stopped in front of her with that same controlled stillness that made her skin prickle. Miss Nelson, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You look surprised to see me. You're a CEO. The words came out sharper than she intended. Of a massive corporation. And you didn't think to mention that. Would it have changed anything that night? Yes. No. I don't know. Sharon took a breath, trying to calm the anger rising in her chest. You let me think you were just some guy in trouble. You let me stitch you up with a sewing kit when you probably have a private doctor on speed dial. I needed someone I could trust. Someone who didn't know who I was. His eyes never left hers. And I was right to trust you. The mortgage, Sharon said quietly. The instruments. Ji-hoon. That was all you. Yes. Why? Because I owe you a debt. And because... He stopped, something flickering across his face. We should not have this conversation here. Too many eyes. Too many ears. Sharon looked around and realized people were watching them, curious and speculating about why CEO Han Hyun was talking to an unknown woman in a consignment dress. Then where? Somewhere private. I can have my driver. No. Sharon cut him off. I'm not getting in a car with you. Not until you tell me the truth. All of it. Han studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. There is a garden terrace through those doors, less crowded. Will that suffice? Sharon followed him through the ballroom and out onto a terrace that overlooked the city lights. It was quieter here, just a handful of other guests smoking or taking calls, and the night air was cool against her skin. Han waited until they were at the far railing, out of earshot from anyone else, before he spoke. What do you want to know? Everything. Who you really are. Why those men were hunting you. What I actually saved that night. You saved exactly what you thought you saved, Han said quietly. A man who would have died without your help. But you're not just some man. You're... Sharon gestured back toward the gala, toward the wealth and power she'd just witnessed. You're this. Whatever this is. I am Han Hyun. I run Hansol International, which is a legitimate business. I employ 12,000 people. We do shipping, logistics, real estate development, technology investment. He paused. I am also the head of the Gumnoon Syndicate, which is not a legitimate business. Sharon's breath caught. Hearing him admit it, hearing the words said so plainly, made it real in a way the internet rumors hadn't. The men chasing me that night were from a rival organization, the Red Vipers. They disguised themselves as police because they knew I would run rather than engage with what I thought were legitimate authorities. His jaw tightened. They wanted to kill me, and they wanted to do it in a way that would embarrass me. Make me look like a common criminal fleeing justice. But you are a criminal, Sharon said. Yes. He didn't flinch from it, didn't try to soften it. I inherited an organization built on violence and control. I have spent 5 years trying to move us toward legitimate business, to wash the blood off our hands. But you cannot erase history. You cannot make people forget what your family was. What you are. Sharon gripped the railing, her knuckles white. And me? What am I in all this? You are the woman who saved my life when you had no reason to, when you saw me at my most vulnerable and chose compassion over caution. Han turned to face her fully. You are also, unfortunately, a target now. What? The Red Vipers have been searching for the person who helped me escape that night. They do not know it was you yet, but they are looking. And when they find out, he stopped, something dangerous flashing in his eyes. They will use you to get to me. That is why I paid your mortgage, why I sent Ji-hoon, why I have had a security detail watching your studio every night. I am trying to keep you safe from the consequences of your kindness. Sharon stepped back from him, anger flaring hot in her chest. You've been watching me, having me followed, controlling my life without asking. And you call that keeping me safe? I call it necessary. You don't get to make that choice for me. Sharon's voice rose, and a few heads turned their direction. She lowered it to a harsh whisper. You don't get to decide what I need or how I live or who watches me. I'm not some asset you acquire, some problem you manage. I'm a person. I know that. For the first time, Han's control seemed to crack, frustration bleeding through. Do you think I want this? Do you think I want you involved in my world? I told you to forget that night happened. I tried to keep my distance. But you are in danger whether you accept it or not. and I will not let you die because you are too stubborn to accept help." "Help?" Sharon laughed bitterly. "You call surveillance and manipulation help? I call it the only way I know how to protect something." He stopped abruptly, his jaw clenching. Someone I value." The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Sharon could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the way her body responded to his proximity despite her anger. This was wrong. He was dangerous. He was a criminal who'd admitted to running an organized crime syndicate, but he'd also been honest with her just now in a way she suspected he rarely was with anyone. And part of her, the part that had been drowning alone for so long, wanted to let him carry some of the weight. "The building," Sharon said finally. "My studio. You said you bought it? The corporation that was evicting you is a subsidiary of one of my legitimate companies. I discovered this after I left your studio that night. When I looked into your situation and realized my own organization was taking away the one thing that mattered to you," his voice went hard, "I fired the entire board of directors. Then I arranged for the deed to be transferred to you anonymously. It will be processed next week." Sharon stared at him. "You're giving me the building. You saved my life. You stitched me back together with a sewing kit and asked for nothing in return. The building is yours. Consider the debt partially repaid." "I don't want your debt repayment. I want—" Sharon stopped, not sure what she wanted anymore. Safety, honesty, distance, closeness. Everything was tangled up and contradictory. "What do you want, Sharon?" Han asked quietly. Before she could answer, his phone buzzed. Then again. He pulled it out, and Sharon saw his entire expression change, going from frustrated to cold and deadly in the space of a heartbeat. "We need to leave. Now." "What's wrong?" "They found you." He grabbed her arm, not rough but urgent. "The Vipers. They just sent me a photo of your studio. They know who you are." Sharon felt the world tilt. "What?" Han was already moving, pulling her back toward the ballroom while talking rapidly into his phone in Korean. Two of the men who'd been nearby earlier materialized out of the crowd, falling into step beside them. Bodyguards, Sharon realized. He'd had bodyguards watching him all night, and she'd thought they were just colleagues. "My car is out front," Han said. "We need to get you somewhere safe. I need to go home. My things." "Your things do not matter. Your life matters." Han's grip on her arm tightened. "They have already been to your studio. If they know where you work, they know where you live. We are not going to your apartment." Sharon wanted to argue, but the cold certainty in his voice stopped her. This was real. The danger she'd half believed was theoretical had become concrete, immediate. Someone was hunting her because she'd saved Han Hyun's life. They made it to the front of the building where a black SUV waited, engine running. Han opened the back door and practically pushed her inside, sliding in beside her while his bodyguards took the front seats. The vehicle was moving before the door even closed. "Where are we going?" Sharon asked, her voice shaking. "My penthouse. It is the most secure location I have." Han was still on his phone, still speaking rapid Korean. Sharon caught words like security and studio and something that might have been cleanup. "They ransacked your studio," he said, switching to English as he ended the call. "My people are there now assessing the damage. It appears they were sending a message rather than trying to find you. Everything is destroyed. But nothing was taken." Sharon felt tears burn her eyes. Her piano, her photos. 8 years of her life in that studio. How bad? Bad. Han's expression was grim. "I am sorry. This is my fault. If I had moved faster, if I had better security on you." "Stop." Sharon wiped her eyes angrily. "Just stop. I don't want apologies. I want to understand what happens now. Now you stay with me until the threat is neutralized." "And how long will that take?" Han's silence was answer enough. The penthouse was exactly what Sharon expected from a man who ran a corporate empire and a crime syndicate. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the entire city. Furniture that probably cost more than her car. Art on the walls that looked original and priceless. Everything clean and expensive and impersonal except for a shelf near the window that held books in Korean and a photo of an older couple Sharon assumed were his parents. "Guest bedroom is through there," Han said, pointing down a hallway. "You will have your own bathroom. Anything you need, just ask." "What I need is my life back." Sharon stood in the middle of his living room, feeling displaced and angry and scared. "I need to not be in danger because I made one good choice." "I know." Han looked exhausted suddenly, the controls slipping to show something roar underneath. "If I could undo this, if I could take back the danger I brought to your door, I would, but I cannot. All I can do is keep you alive." Sharon wanted to stay angry at him, wanted to blame him for everything, but looking at him now, at the tension in his shoulders and the weight in his eyes, she realized he was carrying guilt she hadn't asked him to carry. "The gala invitation," she said suddenly. "That was you too, wasn't it?" "Yes. I arranged it through intermediaries. I wanted to see you again, to make sure you were safe." His mouth twisted. "And I wanted you to know the truth about who I am. I was tired of hiding from you. You could have just come to my studio." "And said what?" "Hello. The man you saved is a crime boss. Please accept this security detail." Han shook his head. "You would have thrown me out. Or called the police. Or both." He wasn't wrong. Sharon probably would have. "I am going to make some calls," Han said. "There is food in the kitchen. Help yourself to anything. Try to rest." He disappeared into what looked like a home office, and Sharon was left alone in a penthouse that felt like a luxury prison. She found the guest bedroom and sat on a bed that was probably worth more than everything she owned. Her phone buzzed with messages from students asking about lessons, from her roommate wondering where she was, from the bank about something unimportant. Normal life continuing like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And Sharon wasn't sure she could ever go back to normal. She must have fallen asleep eventually because she woke to darkness and the sound of voices in the living room. Sharon crept to the bedroom door and listened. Need to find them before they find her again. That was Han, his voice hard. "I want every contact, every safe house, every person who might know where the Vipers are holed up. And I want it done quietly. No open warfare. Not yet." "Boss, with respect." They already declared war when they touched her studio. The other voice was male, younger. "Let us hit back. Let us show them what happens when they threaten your people." "No." Han's voice was absolute. "We do this carefully. We do this smart. Sharon Nelson is not a weapon to start a war with. She is someone I will protect at any cost, which means we do not escalate until we have no other choice." Sharon pressed her hand to her mouth, emotions she couldn't name churning in her chest. He was talking about her like she mattered, like protecting her was worth restraining his entire organization. The days that followed were strange and claustrophobic. Sharon stayed in Han's penthouse under constant watch. Ji-hoon came by to check on her, and she realized the boy was as much her bodyguard as he'd ever been her student. Han was gone during the days, managing his businesses and apparently hunting the Red Vipers, but he came back every evening and they ate dinner together in silence, heavy with things neither of them said. On the third night, Sharon couldn't take it anymore. "I need to go back to work," she said over the takeout Han had ordered. "My students need me. The recital is in 2 weeks, and we're not ready." "Absolutely not." Han didn't even look up from his food. "It is not safe." "It's not safe to hide here either. Those men aren't going to give up just because I'm inconvenient to find." Sharon set down her chopsticks. "And I'm not going to stop living my life because of them. The recital is important. My students have been preparing for months. Some of them need the scholarship money this could lead to." I'm not canceling on them, then postpone it. No. Sharon's voice was firm. You want to protect me. Fine. Flood the venue with security. Put bodyguards everywhere. But I'm doing this recital. With or without your permission. Han finally looked at her, something like frustration and reluctant admiration in his eyes. You are incredibly stubborn. And you're incredibly controlling. We've established this. Sharon met his gaze steadily. I saved your life because I believe people deserve second chances. But I also believe life is worth living, even when it's dangerous. Maybe especially then. So either help me make this recital safe, or get out of my way. For a long moment, Han said nothing. Then, slowly, he smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger and less dangerous and heartbreakingly human. Very well, he said. We will do your recital. But on my terms, with my security, and you do not argue with my people when they tell you something is not safe. Deal. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Han was true to his word. He rented out the entire grand hall where the gala had been held, arranged for professional sound equipment, hired ushers and stage managers. Sharon's students practiced in a rehearsal space so nice they could barely believe it was real, and everywhere Sharon looked, there were Han's people. Men and women in elegant suits who watched the doors, monitored the hallways, checked every delivery and visitor. It should have felt oppressive. Instead, it felt like armor. Sharon barely saw Han during those 2 weeks. He was hunting the Vipers, she knew, though he never gave her details. She caught glimpses of him late at night when he returned to the penthouse, saw the blood on his knuckles once that he tried to hide, heard him on the phone speaking in Korean with a voice like ice. But he always asked how her day was, always made sure she'd eaten, always looked at her like she was something precious and breakable that he couldn't afford to lose. The night before the recital, Sharon found him standing at the window looking out at the city. She'd been planning to go straight to bed, but something about the tension in his shoulders made her stop. Can't sleep? She asked. I do not sleep much these days. He didn't turn around. Too many threats to track. Too many variables to control. Sharon moved to stand beside him. From up here, the city looked like a carpet of lights stretching to the horizon, beautiful and vast and indifferent. Have you found them? The Vipers? We are close. My people think they are planning something for tomorrow night. They know about the recital. Han's jaw clenched. I have 100 security personnel covering the venue. Snipers in the rafters. Armed guards at every entrance. But if they truly want to get to you, to get to me through you, then they will try regardless of what we do, Sharon finished. So we might as well give my students their moment, give them something beautiful before the violence comes. Han finally turned to look at her. How are you so calm about this? I'm not calm. I'm terrified. Sharon wrapped her arms around herself. But I'm also tired of letting fear control everything. I've spent the last year watching my dream die slowly, losing my studio piece by piece because I was too afraid to take risks. Then I made one brave choice saving you, and everything changed. I don't regret it. Even with all of this, I don't regret it. You should. Han's voice was rough. You should regret ever seeing me in that alley, but I don't. Sharon reached out without thinking and touched his arm. You've been honest with me, even when the truth made you look bad. You've protected me without asking for anything in return, and you've given my students opportunities they never would have had without you. Whatever else you are, you're also someone who keeps his promises. Han stared at her hand on his arm like he couldn't quite believe it was there. Then, slowly, he covered it with his own. After tomorrow, he said quietly. After this is over, you can leave. Go back to your life. I will make sure the Vipers never bother you again. You will be free of all of this. And if I don't want to be free of it? The words were out before Sharon could stop them. What if I want to understand what this is between us? Han's eyes met hers, dark and intense, and full of something Sharon was afraid to name. You do not want to be involved with someone like me, Sharon. I have blood on my hands. Real blood. People have died because of my orders. I know. She didn't pull away. And you're still the man who looked at my eviction notices and decided to give me back my studio. Who sends his nephew to learn piano so I'll be protected? Who is putting 100 people at risk tomorrow to make sure my students get to perform? You're not just the blood on your hands. You're also the man who keeps his promises. For a moment, she thought he might close the distance between them. Thought he might pull her close and kiss her like she was suddenly, desperately wanting him to. But instead, he gently removed her hand from his arm and stepped back. Get some rest, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Tomorrow will be difficult. You will need your strength. Sharon wanted to argue, to push past his walls and make him admit whatever was building between them. But she could see the tension in every line of his body, the way he was holding himself back through sheer force of will. Good night, Han, she said softly. Good night, Sharon. The day of the recital was perfect. Clear skies, perfect temperature, her students dressed in their best clothes and buzzing with nervous excitement. Sharon stood backstage at the grand hall watching them warm up, feeling pride swell in her chest. They'd worked so hard for this. They deserved this moment. Miss Nelson. Jihoon appeared at her elbow, looking polished in a black suit. We are ready whenever you are. Sharon took a breath and walked onto the stage to give her opening remarks. The hall was packed. Parents, friends, community members who'd heard about the event. And scattered throughout the audience, she could pick out Han's security. Too well-dressed to be random attendees. Too watchful to be parents. Han himself sat in the front row, surrounded by his people. Their eyes met, and he gave her the smallest nod. I am here. You are safe. The recital began. Student after student took the stage, played their pieces with varying degrees of skill and confidence. Sharon watched from the wings, her heart full despite the undercurrent of tension, despite the armed guards she knew were watching every entrance. Jihoon was 3 students from the end when Sharon noticed it. A man in the back row, too still, his hand inside his jacket. Another man near the side exit, speaking into his collar. Not Han's people. The way they moved was wrong. Sharon's blood went cold. They were here. The Vipers had infiltrated the venue. She looked toward Han and saw that he'd noticed too. He was speaking rapidly into his phone while his bodyguards moved into position, trying to be subtle about it. But more men were appearing. At the exits, in the aisles. More than there should be. They'd brought an army. Sharon watched in horror as one of them locked the main doors from the inside. Parents were starting to notice now, starting to whisper and look around nervously. On stage, her student finished her piece to scattered, confused applause. Then a man walked onto the stage from the opposite wing. Tall, muscular, with a serpent tattoo visible on his neck. He was holding a gun. Everyone remain seated, he announced, his voice carrying through the hall. This will be over quickly if you cooperate. Screams erupted. Parents grabbed their children. Han's security drew weapons, but they were outnumbered and surrounded by civilians they couldn't risk hitting. Sharon Nelson, the man with the serpent tattoo called out. Come out here. Now. Or we start shooting students. Sharon's whole body was shaking, but she made herself walk onto the stage. She'd put these people in danger. Her students. Their families. All because she'd saved Han Hyun's life. I'm here, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Good. The man grabbed her arm roughly, dragging her to center stage. He pressed the gun to her temple, and Sharon heard Han roar her name from the audience. Now, Han Hyun, we know you're here. Come out, or I blow her head off in front of all these nice people. Han stood slowly. His face was a mask of cold fury Sharon had never seen before. "Let her go. Your fight is with me." "Oh, we know that." The Serpent Man smiled. "That's why she's perfect leverage. You care about her, don't you? The little piano teacher who saved your life. She's your weakness." "She is nothing to me," Han said. But his eyes met Sharon's and she saw the lie. "Just someone who is in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then you won't mind if we—" Sharon didn't let him finish. She slammed her elbow back into his ribs, twisted out of his grip, and dove for the heavy piano bench that sat at the edge of the stage. She'd performed this movement 1,000 times in her head over the past weeks. The angle, the momentum, the target. She grabbed the bench and swung it with every ounce of strength she had, catching the Serpent Man in the knee. He went down with a scream, his gun firing wildly into the ceiling. That was the signal. Han's snipers in the rafters opened fire. Armed guards at the exits moved in. Han himself was running toward the stage with a speed and violence that was terrifying to witness. Gunfire erupted. Sharon grabbed the nearest students and pulled them behind the piano as bullets stitched through the air. The hall dissolved into chaos, people screaming and running and diving for cover. The Serpent Man, still down but not out, lunged for Sharon. She kicked at him, but he was stronger, faster. His hand closed around her ankle, dragging her back. Sharon screamed and grabbed for purchase, her fingers finding piano keys that depressed in a discordant crash. Then Han was there. He pulled the Viper leader off her and slammed him into the stage floor with a sickening crack. They fought with a brutal efficiency Sharon had never witnessed, all raw power and controlled violence. Han's movements were precise, devastating. Every strike calculated to disable or destroy. The Viper pulled a knife. Han caught his wrist and twisted until something snapped. The man screamed. Han didn't slow down. He grabbed the Viper by his collar and his belt and literally threw him across the stage, through the beautiful grand piano that exploded in a cacophony of strings and wood and ivory keys. The rest of the fight was over in minutes. Han's security overwhelmed the Vipers. Real police were flooding in now, called by someone's 911 call. Sharon sat on the stage floor, surrounded by her students who clung to her and cried, and watched as Han Hyun stood in the ruins of the recital hall, covered in blood that wasn't his, breathing hard. His eyes found hers, and Sharon saw the question there. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He moved toward her, but the police were there now, separating everyone, taking statements, securing the scene. The police, the real ones this time, were surprisingly deferential to Han Hyun. His lawyers arrived within 15 minutes, already talking jurisdiction and self-defense, and standing their ground. Sharon watched in a daze as bodies were covered, witnesses were interviewed, and her students were reunited with terrified parents. Ji-hoon appeared at her elbow, completely calm despite everything. "Are you hurt, Miss Nelson?" No, I'm okay." Sharon looked at him. "You knew this would happen." Uncle anticipated the possibility. Ji-hoon's young face was serious. That is why he prepared so thoroughly. He would not have let you do this recital if he had not been confident he could protect you. Someone could have died, but no one did. Because Uncle never fails when it matters. Ji-hoon squeezed her shoulder gently. He is very good at protecting the things he loves. Sharon started to ask what he meant by that, but then the police wanted her statement. By the time she finished talking to them, the hall was nearly empty. The bodies had been removed, the evidence collected. All that remained was the destruction, the shattered piano, the bullet holes in the walls, the blood on the stage where she'd performed 100 times in her imagination, but never like this. She found Hans sitting at the edge of the stage, his expensive suit ruined, his knuckles split and bleeding. His lawyers were gone, His security had pulled back to give them space. It was just the two of them in the ruins. Sharon sat down beside him, her legs dangling off the stage. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "I destroyed your recital," Han said finally, his voice raw. "You saved my life." Again. Sharon looked at the shattered piano, at the keys scattered across the stage like broken teeth. "The recital doesn't matter. Those people are safe because of you. They were in danger because of me. No. They were in danger because of the Red Vipers, because of men who see violence as the solution to everything." Sharon turned to face him. "You could have let me be captured. Used me as bait to draw them out. But instead, you fought for me. You protected my students. You kept your promise." Han laughed, the sound bitter. "I killed 3 men tonight, Sharon. In front of children. In front of you. I am exactly the monster you should be running from. Then why am I not running?" He looked at her then. Really looked at her. And Sharon saw everything he'd been holding back. The fear, the guilt, the desperate hope that she might understand him despite everything. "Because you are braver than anyone I have ever known," Han said quietly. "Or more foolish. I have not decided which. Maybe both." Sharon reached out and took his bloody hand in hers. "The Vipers. Is it over?" "Yes. Their leader is dead. The survivors will scatter or be absorbed by other organizations. They will not bother you again. Then what happens now?" Han's thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture unconscious and intimate. "Now you are free. You can go back to your studio, teach your students, live your life without armed guards and assassins and crime bosses complicating everything. Is that what you want?" "What I want," Han said, his voice strained, "is irrelevant. You deserve better than this. Better than me." Sharon moved closer, until their shoulders touched. "Earlier, you said you owed me a debt. That debts are sacred where you come from. Does that debt include making my choices for me? No. Then stop deciding what I deserve. Stop trying to protect me from yourself." Sharon took a breath. "I know who you are. I know what you've done. And I'm still here. That should tell you something." Han's dark eyes searched her face. "You cannot want this. You cannot want a life where danger follows you, where every moment could be your last." "I don't want that," Sharon admitted. "But I also don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose you anyway." "Sharon, can you love someone like me?" She interrupted. "Someone who doesn't understand your world, who will question your choices, who comes with students and recitals and a life that doesn't fit with yours." "I already do," Han said, the words pulled from somewhere deep. "From the moment you pulled me into your studio, from the moment you risked everything for a stranger, I have been yours, even when I tried not to be." Sharon felt tears burn her eyes, but they were the good kind. The kind that came with relief and hope and the terrifying joy of choosing something dangerous because it felt right. "Then ask me what you wanted to ask earlier," she said. "Before you decided I deserved better." Han cupped her face in his bloodied hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "Sharon Nelson, can you love a man with blood on his hands? A man who will bring danger to your door? A man who is more monster than human on most days?" Sharon leaned into his touch. "I can love the man who keeps his promises, who protects what matters to him, who fights for me when I'm in danger." She smiled through her tears. "The blood washes off. The rest is just choosing each other. Every day. Even when it's hard." Han kissed her then, soft and desperate, and full of everything they'd been holding back. Sharon kissed him back, tasting salt and copper and the promise of something that should have been impossible but felt inevitable. When they finally pulled apart, Han rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to buy you a new piano." Sharon laughed, surprised into joy. "That's very romantic." "I am serious. The most beautiful piano money can buy. And I am going to learn to play it, badly, until you forgive me for destroying this one. I already forgive you. Then I will learn to play it until you love me. I already love you, you idiot. Sharon pulled back to look at him. Though piano lessons wouldn't hurt. Jihoon told me you have terrible rhythm. Han's smile was slow and real, and entirely hers. Jihoon talks too much. They sat there in the ruins of the hall as dawn light began to filter through the windows, turning the broken piano into something that looked almost beautiful in the golden glow. Sharon knew they had a lot to figure out. How her world and his would fit together. How she would explain armed bodyguards to her students' parents. How they would navigate a relationship built on danger and trust, and the strange alchemy of two people who chose each other despite every reason not to. But in that moment, with Han's hand in hers and the promise of tomorrow stretching ahead, Sharon felt something she hadn't felt in years. Certainty. She'd made the right choice that night in the rain. And she was making the right choice now. The piano was destroyed. The recital was chaos. Her quiet life was over forever. But she had this. She had him. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough. 3 months later, Sharon stood in her studio, her building now, deed in her name, completely paid off and played the new piano Han had bought her. It was beautiful. A Steinway grand that took up half the room and sounded like heaven. Han sat on the bench beside her, attempting to follow along with a simple melody, his fingers clumsy on the keys. You are terrible at this, Sharon said, trying not to laugh. I am aware. But Han kept playing, his face serious with concentration. You said I needed to learn. I said it wouldn't hurt. I didn't say it was mandatory. Everything I do for you is mandatory. He hit a wrong note and grimaced. I owe you a debt, remember? Sharon stopped playing and turned to face him. You know the debt is paid, right? The building, the security, fighting off assassins for me. We're even. Han's smile was small and private. We will never be even, Sharon Nelson. You saved my life before you knew who I was. When I was powerless and bleeding and hunted, you gave me a gift I can never repay, so I will spend the rest of my life trying. Sharon kissed him, soft and sweet. Then I guess you better keep practicing. These scales aren't going to master themselves. Han groaned but bent back over the keys. Through the window, Sharon could see Jihoon sitting in the black sedan outside, pretending he wasn't there to watch over her between his actual piano lessons. Could see the normal life continuing around them. Students coming and going, parents dropping off kids, music drifting through the spring air. Her life was stranger now. More complicated. But it was also fuller, richer, more alive than it had been before. She'd saved a monster in the rain and found out he was human. Found out he could love as fiercely as he fought. Found out that sometimes the dangerous choice was also the right one. Sharon played the melody again, and this time Han followed along. A little better, a little steadier. They weren't perfect. They would never be perfect. But they were choosing each other. In the light this time, with clear eyes and open hearts. And that was its own kind of music.